Thank you. Well, it's great to be back here at Penware. I think this is now my third or fourth time speaking. I really appreciate the opportunity for a new fee to be coming out to the West. I really appreciate the presentations just previous, because it really sort of sets up where the U.S. Resiliency Council was founded. Maybe I'll bring that in a little bit as well. The amount of natural disasters and the social and economic impacts that it has caused around the world, around our two countries, has just grown, exponentially over the past 20 years. And now having $100 billion disasters or several $100 billion disasters every year around the world is normal and commonplace. And of course, as has been stated, better than I will do in this one slide, that is happening in the Pacific Northwest as well. This slide is from the FEMA risk map, which shows state by state the annual losses due to natural perils. So earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, wildfires, tornadoes, all that. And just for the 5 Penware states, that's over $4 billion every single year. That you lose in economic and damage costs. And the numbers are probably proportional for the 5 territories, but it shows that there is a long way to go to make our communities, our regions more sustainable. Because of course, sustainability isn't just about having a lower impact on the environment. And let me talk a little bit about one earthquake in particular. It's not all showing up there, but this is Christchurch, New Zealand. Okay, and in 2010 and 2011, they had 2 of the largest earthquakes that could occur in New Zealand. They were sort of their maximum level earthquakes. And this is the city before the earthquake, and this was the city right after the earthquake. The good news, if there was good news, was that of the thousands of buildings in the central business district, only 2 collapsed, and that's where most of the 160 or so people died. And for any earthquake that is sort of the maximum that you could feel, think of a subduction zone earthquake in the Pacific Northwest or a large San Andreas earthquake in northern or southern California, to really only have 2 buildings collapse is a tremendous success. But on the downside, over half of the central business district was eventually demolished because of damage. Okay? And it's been about 13 years since those earthquakes, and it's less than half rebuilt now. Okay, so these economic and social impacts are tremendous, and they are long-lasting. They are generational. Think of Hurricane Katrina, right? I mean, we see these, and obviously in countries that are, very well advanced. And even beyond that, the environmental impacts, we talk about sustainability as sort of green design, but the environmental impacts of natural disasters are huge. When buildings are damaged in a natural disaster, you don't have the luxury of deconstructing them, right? You can't pick them apart and take out all the toxic chemicals and recycle things. You just haul the stuff off to a landfill as quick as possible. And what happened in Christchurch is there was so much debris that they created mounds of debris that were 80 feet tall, and they would ship the debris to other islands on barges. And of course, all of that debris will have to be replaced eventually. So the environmental impact just of replacing those materials is enormous. But the negative environmental health impacts of having all of that asbestos and lead and other toxic materials decomposing in landfills, because again, they just didn't have the opportunity to clean it up and pick it apart, it is going to be felt for multiple generations in New Zealand and these islands where they hauled this stuff. The same was true in Superstorm Sandy on the East Coast. generated, I think, 10 million cubic yards of debris. And again, all that stuff is in landfills all over the eastern seaboard right now, and who knows what damage it will end up doing. So we can design our buildings to be green and to have a low impact on the environment. But if they're not resilient, if the environment doesn't have a low impact on our buildings, then it not only has a huge socioeconomic impact, it has an environmental impact too. So it's all related. So this idea that we have to design for things to be better than minimum codes, because these buildings in Christchurch were mostly built to newer code. Okay? Buildings in California are built to very good codes, but they're not built to withstand these maximum events with a lot of damage. Right? And so that's where sort of the U.S. Resiliency Council, and I'll talk about that in a second, came into play. And the good news from my perspective is that this idea of resilience is getting a lot more attention from the business sector, right? I want to make the case today that resilience isn't just good for the environment, it's good business. And you see this right now in some negative ways. I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but in the United States, several states in the Northwest and California as well have started losing insurers. Insurers are pulling out of the state altogether. They won't insure because of wildfire. In the Southeast, they don't want to insure because of flood or windstorm. And, if you can't insure something, you can't lend on it either, right? The USRC was given a grant to develop a rating system for wind by a bank, because the bank was afraid that if there wasn't some standard for evaluating and improving building performance for wind, that they wouldn't be able to lend in coastal Southeast states. So, as you can see, FEMA has said that there's over $41 trillion of building exposure due to natural disasters, and this is just the US. And I showed you $4.2 billion for the Pacific Northwest. Well, it's 10 times that if you take all of the United States together in average annual losses that we're losing each year. Insurance companies won't sustain that. Okay, they will find other places to insure that are less risky, unless they can be convinced that the buildings and infrastructure we're designing don't have that same level of risk. On the positive side of things, you see corporations, and you see the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission requiring all major companies to start issuing ESG reports, environmental, social, governance reports, on how their businesses and their supply chains impact the environment and how natural disasters impact their business. And so that's a very positive thing, because it shows that businesses, large businesses are really coming to the table to try and understand what the impacts they're having are. But the idea is that, and McKinsey and the U.S. National Association of Realtors have all warned that unless something is done to make our building stock more resilient, real estate will become unaffordable. Housing will become even more unaffordable and more unavailable than it is today. And so we're really seeing this need, and in the last session you heard this too, to design so that our buildings de-risk the economy. And so really what I'm getting at is that when we talk of this term sustainability, which has traditionally been focused on green design, again, us having a low impact on the environment, we really have to think of resilience as the other side of that coin, really the complementary side of that coin, is that the environment having a low impact on us. And to get to our sustainability goals, whether it's net zero 2050, or if it's that communities that can remain in the long term, multi-generational without being destroyed, we have to think of green design and resilient design together. And that's where the U.S. Resiliency Council comes in. We were created about 10 years ago, and our mission was to develop metrics using science and engineering. We're founded by engineers. To use engineering and science to be able to quantitatively measure the performance of buildings in natural disasters. To provide, in the same way that if you invest in a stock or a bond, it has a credit rating, right? I mean, all of you from municipalities know what a muni bond is, right? They have those credit ratings. We don't have something like that for buildings. I mean, we have them for restaurants. I'm sure if you go into any restaurant in Canada, it's got a letter on it. It certainly does in the US, A, B, or C. We have them for toasters. We have them for our cars. Why don't we have them for probably the most expensive investment any of us will ever have or be in, a building? And so the USRC was started to develop those kinds of metrics around these ideas of safety, but also damage, how much it'll cost to repair buildings, and how long it will take to recover. Right? Because recovery is essential to sustainability. And we're developing now, or we're in the process of looking at developing an environmental dimension too. When we design our buildings more resiliently, how much lower an impact on the environment will they have? And what we really wanted to stress was that code design is great, but it is only sort of the start. It is the middle of the road, right? Our newer codes are still primarily life safety codes. And, and Marie talked about it, Representative Ryu talked about it, this idea of developing functional recovery standards so that we're not only looking at buildings that are safe, but buildings that can recover quickly. That's not a part of our codes yet. And most people don't understand that. The folks in New Zealand certainly did not understand that when 50% of the buildings in the downtown area had to be demolished, right? And engineers cheered because only 2 collapsed, but everybody else was like, well, what the hell? We're out of business. We got to move. So the codes have to align with our expectations of how buildings should perform. And so resilience-based design, the idea there is that we can design better. We can design so that you can recover in days or weeks instead of months or years, and that recovery costs will be manageable by cities, by businesses, by families. And the good news is that engineers are really good at what they do. I know, I am one. And designing a building to be more resilient typically costs between 0 and 2% of the building cost. You're not doubling the cost of the building to make it more resilient. You're adding 1 or 2% at most to a building, and that means it's affordable. And we have a great example in the Pacific Northwest. This is the Oregon State Treasury building, okay? This building replaces one that is so essential because after an earthquake or a flood or any natural disaster, the people in this building have to get checks to people that are on public assistance or any kind of services. They all go through they all went through the old Oregon Treasury building, and now they'll go through this nice new one that's base isolated. So it's got every type of disaster resilience you can think of. Earthquake resilience, flood, fire. It's got backup supplies and utilities. And it was a building that received a USRC, U.S. Resiliency Council, platinum rating for its survivability, basically. It should be fully operational through the largest earthquake or wildfire you can expect in Oregon, providing those services to the community. So we're very proud of that, and that's the kind of thing that is going on all over the country now, and happily in the Pacific Northwest as well. One of the other things that the U.S. Resiliency Council does is advocate for policies, and I know a lot of you are policymakers, advocates for policies that will encourage resilient design. One of the most dangerous types of buildings, as we all know, Anne-Marie just mentioned it, are unreinforced masonry buildings, right? These old brick buildings built in the 30s, they're all over the whole country, both of our countries, actually. But another type of very dangerous building for earthquakes are soft story apartment buildings. And you have them all over, again, in both countries. These are apartments that are built on small plots of land, so the parking is underneath the living spaces, right? So you don't have a whole separate parking lot. And so they're very popular. There's maybe 100,000 of them just in California alone. But they're very dangerous, and many people died in an earthquake in Northridge in 1994 because of them. As you can imagine, you have all this weight on top, and you have nothing but open space underneath. And so over 2 million Californians are probably at risk for collapse of these types of buildings in different earthquakes. So the U.S. Resiliency Council worked with the state to pass legislation that provided a grant program, a $250 million grant program to owners of these soft-story buildings, which fortunately are very easy to fix with some steel frames on the bottom without even impacting the upper floors. And those grants will go towards these owners of these buildings, which are predominantly housing sort of more moderate to lower income folks, okay? All throughout California, protect as many as a 250,000 Californians potentially. And so this is the kind of advocacy work that can be done in Oregon and Washington, in British Columbia, Alaska, other parts of the Pacific Northwest that have earthquake risk, to make, to bring very cost-effective solutions to making people safer and making the resilience of our buildings higher. Not only, obviously, will these protect lives, but, you know, so many workers and employees of companies, small businesses in particular, live in these types of properties. And so part of the reason that the central business district in Christchurch is still closed is because nobody lives there, so nobody can work there. So this protects people's lives, but it also protects the economy of a region. So everybody benefits. And of course, the people that lend on these buildings, a lot of these buildings have mortgages. A lot of these buildings have earthquake insurance. It de-risks everything. So everybody benefits from this. So this is the kind of advocacy work that we're proud to be doing. Another thing that we're working on developing now with the university, or with Syracuse University, I'm sorry that the title has gotten messed up with that, is we're calling it the Building Resilience Hub. This will be a center of research into resilience and how building better buildings and infrastructure more resiliently will have these positive impacts on the social and economic fabric, how it will be good business, how it will be good environmental stewardship. And our hope is to attract investment and sponsorship of this hub from everyone in construction, the concrete, the steel, the wood industry, to those on the government side who want to see quantitative research in how to make how to translate the good science of resilience into action, but also from insurance companies and lenders who will use this to make better decisions about the properties that they lend on and insure. So these are, right, so these are where I see Penware as being able to really take leadership in moving this idea of resilience forward. First, the presenters today have made that very clear. To understand the impact that the performance of our buildings have on our communities, on economic sustainability, on the environment itself, okay? And to be able to quantify and demonstrate to the public how resilience helps them. You know, I showed you in the beginning that slide of the damage, the annual damage in different states in the United States. And Anne-Marie showed how over time that was changing from just being in Seattle to all over the state. And this should be the one thing that we can all agree on, is that, you know, making our infrastructure more resilient helps everybody. It's good for business. It's not just a feel-good thing. It's not just a social thing, which are all great and important. It's not just an environmental thing. It's also good for business. And I know that Penware is focused on economic vitalization of the Pacific Northwest region. And I can't think of many more things that would be more valuable and bring all of your different political and geographical interests together than making this region as strong economically as you can by making it more resilient. And so I'm going to encourage, I think this is my last slide, the encouragement is to look for ways to find incentives that developers of buildings, owners of buildings, are incentivized to make those buildings better than code. Okay, when we build infrastructure, to build it better. When we build housing, to just go beyond that minimum that you have to do and build it better. And everybody wins when that happens. Every dollar you invest in resilient design benefits $6 or $12 or $13. Well, those benefits go to a lot of different folks, right? They obviously go to the building owner who has less risk, but they go to insurers and lenders. They go to the city that collects sales tax from a restaurant. They go to the county that collects property taxes. So all of these stakeholders benefit, and that's where that number comes from. So all of those stakeholders should be willing to contribute to helping those initial developers or building owners make those buildings more resilient, because they receive a benefit for it too. So I'm really excited about the opportunity for Penware to have this working group focused on building resilience. I think it's fantastic. I wish California and had something like that, or the states outside of Penware. But I think it's a way to lead the nation, lead both of our nations in moving forward and recognizing, how we can have an impact. So I think that's my last slide. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.